So what is a contingency when it comes to real estate? In this video, we're going to go over what a contingency is, what types of common contingencies are related to the real estate contract, and then some tips and tricks on how you can make sure that you are protected and knowing when you are actually at risk with the contracts that you write if you're buying a home. Hey everybody, this is Brad Decater with the Decater Real Estate Group. Thanks so much for tuning in again. I appreciate the support. This is a channel where we talk about all things real estate, tips and tricks for buyers and sellers, and our local market here in King County, Washington. All right, so let's get right into it here. So first off, what is a contingency? In a general sense, contingency, just the word, what it means is that something has to happen in order for something else to happen. A contingency simply means that there is some sort of requirement that has to be fulfilled in order to close on the house. So the easiest way to actually grasp it and explain it is to just give you one of the examples. So let's just say an inspection contingency. You've probably heard of those before. They're very common in the real estate contract. So if you have an inspection contingency in place, that just means that your offer is contingent upon a satisfied inspection from the buyer. So it just means that this has to happen in order for us to actually close and buy the house. So that's all a contingency is just saying, hey, we need to have this done, whatever it is, in this case the inspection contingency, in order to move forward and close. And so there's lots of different contingencies within the contract, but at a basic level, that's all it means, is that if something is contingent upon something else, it just means that this has to be satisfied in order to do this, which is closing the house in this case. So now that we have an idea of what a contingency is, let's go over all the main examples. There's typically going to be 4 when you're talking about a standard real estate contract, although there can be tons and tons. Really anything can be a contingency, so we can get into that here in a little bit. The first one was already mentioned, and that's going to be the inspection contingency. So again, it's very common for a buyer to want to get a home inspection and make their offer contingent upon that being satisfied. So they need to make sure that the house is in good shape and they feel comfortable moving forward to actually buying the house. So when you have these contingencies in place, it's basically protecting you from losing your earnest money if you were to decide to get out of the contract. So for the inspection contingency example, you had the inspection. If it goes well and you feel good, then great, you can move forward and that contingency is now satisfied. So it's done and you can move towards closing. If there's any other contingencies in the way of closing, then those would need to be satisfied as well in order to close. But that first one of the inspection is now satisfied if you deem it satisfied by giving them the paperwork back saying, hey, we approved this inspection, or maybe you negotiate it. That's more common, honestly. But as long as you guys come to terms, it'll then be satisfied. Now, if it is not satisfied, that's the whole reason it exists, is to protect you. So because it's a contingency in the contract, if you decide you don't want to buy the house anymore, you absolutely have that right, and you can do that, and you can get out of the contract using the inspection contingency and get your earnest money back to you. So you can hang on to your money, you don't lose anything from it except for the cost of, you probably had to pay the home inspector. But overall, you get your earnest money back, no harm, no foul. That's why we have these protections and contingencies in the contract, so that the buyer or you can get out of the contract legally with the use of these contingencies and get your earnest money back. If you don't know what earnest money is, by the way, I've done other videos on this, so you can click here to see the video on what earnest money is. So the second type of contingency that's very common in real estate is going to be the financing contingency. It is exactly what it sounds like. It's meaning that this offer is contingent upon receiving financing. So most people aren't buying houses in cash. If you are, you wouldn't need this contingency in place. But if you're someone who's getting a mortgage and getting a loan on the property, that means the lender's going to have to approve you and give you the loan and give you basically a big, huge chunk of cash, which is going to be then on a mortgage that you're going to be paying off over time. So because of this, you know that if the lender told you that you couldn't get the loan, obviously you wouldn't be able to buy the house anymore, assuming you weren't buying in cash. So it is contingent or required that this lender gives you the loan so that you can buy the house. So for that reason, for almost all buyers that I work with, we are going to be putting a financing contingency in there saying that we need to receive financing in order for this to work, which is why it's important that we give pre-approval letters and we show the sellers that we're serious and we're qualified buyers, because they know that we have to get this loan to buy the house. So they don't want to risk and mess around with people who haven't talked to lenders yet. So again, same concept with the inspection. I won't get into each concept. So it's the same concept as the inspection. They really all are, so I don't need to explain it each time. But if you were to lose your job or just for any reason you were not able to obtain financing with the lender, then you would be protected. The contingency in the contract makes it so that you're protected, you can get your earnest money back and get out of the contract because you were not able to obtain financing, and it was contingent upon you receiving financing. So the third one that's also very common in real estate is the appraisal. This is actually pretty much tied to the financing addendum. The appraisal contingency, it basically protects you from overpaying, because they're saying, hey, the lender's saying, we need to get an appraisal on this property to make sure it's worth what we're paying for it. Again, there's more videos on the appraisal. I don't want to go into all the details. This is just about what contingencies are and which ones are common. But same thing goes here. If the appraisal doesn't come in at the value, there's a few options that can be done with that. You can click on this video here to learn about what happens with a low appraisal. But if you had this contingency in place, just like the other contingencies, you are protected. You can get out of the contract and get your money back if you can't negotiate a deal from there. The fourth one, also very common in real estate, is going to be the title contingency. This one's pretty important, just like the rest of them, but this one is making sure that the actual title and the deed can be conveyed to you in the sale. So very important to make sure that you can actually get ownership of the property. So you'll see in almost every single contract and every lender pre-approval, they're always saying this is contingent upon a clean title report and being able to transfer this title to the new owner. Because if that can't happen, then obviously that you can't buy the house, or you wouldn't want to if you can't actually be on the deed and have the title. I would say fairly uncommon. It's not very often that it happens that there's a huge issue with title that can't get resolved. It's pretty common that there maybe is an issue that you have to work around, but it's usually can be figured out. But this is making sure that you're protected if there is something going on, because the seller, they might have some massive title issues that you don't know about until someone pulls title and finds out. They could have IRS liens, tax liens. They could be owing $300,000-$400,000 to taxes, and the IRS actually put a lien on their house to do that, so that they make sure when the house sells, they get their money back. It can be a million different other types of liens. Contractor liens are pretty important, pretty common. So like a roofer comes in and fixes the roof. Last year, the seller, obviously not a very good person, for whatever reason, decides not to pay them. The contractor's only really way to get their money back is to sue or to put a lien on the house, which is a cloud on title. And they're basically saying with the county on the title, saying that if this house sells, I am owed my 20 grand from the roof repair because the seller will not pay, but I know they have equity in this property, so I know if I go after the property, I will eventually be able to get my money back. So those are some examples of issues that can come up with title. Usually it has to do with liens or sometimes surveys or property line disputes, things like that, or easements, stuff like that. There's a variety of different reasons that it could be having an issue for you, but just know that that's why we have that contingency in place, because there could be some complications with title and getting a clear title for you to take over. So we have that contingency, which is going to protect you from not being able to close because of one of those issues that really isn't your fault. So hopefully that kind of clears up, you guys, what contingencies are. Again, just to recap, they're just what is protecting you from getting out of the contract, basically. So it's contingent upon one thing happening in order to close the house. Some other ones that are fairly common but not as common is going to be like a home sale contingency. So they need to sell their house first to get the money out in order to buy this house. There could be like, we need to lease our property before we can buy this house. And again, it could be really anything at all. It could be contingent upon them demolishing the shed that's like falling apart in the backyard. It could be contingent on them mowing the grass. That's a ridiculous one. I've never heard of that before. But the point is, the offer can be contingent on anything. It just means that this is what has to happen in order for us to close. So there's tons and tons of different contingencies you can put in. These are the most common ones, but you can get really nitpicky and make any ones that you want to. So those are the 4 most common contingencies that we see in most standard real estate contracts, inspections, appraisals, financing, and title. But there's definitely a million different contingencies that you could have. So I just want to make sure you guys are aware that that's not the only ones that you can have to protect yourself. You can literally write a contingency for anything that you wanted, as long as it's properly documented in the forms and it's in the contract. So hopefully this helps you guys and understand the basics of what a contingency is, and then specifically what are the main contingencies that are going to be protecting you in the real estate contract if you're the buyer, and as the seller, be aware of that as well. If you have any questions or have a funny contingency that you used one time in one of the houses that you bought, drop them down in the comments. I'd love to read that and interact with it. Otherwise, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing, and we'll see you next time.